Well, afternoon and welcome to our latest virtual afternoon tea. My name is Marcus Farnfield and I'm a paraplanner here at Expert Wealth. It's my very great pleasure today to welcome back Neil Bage to our virtual stage. Neil's the co-founder of BIQ, which is a behavioural insights organisation that works really closely with financial advisors and planners across the country. Neil's become really well known amongst those in our community for his great knowledge into the way that we as humans process the vast amount of data that we come into contact with as we try and make sense of the world, and indeed how we as individuals make decisions with that data. As ever, we'd really like to make this session an interactive one, so please do feel free to post any questions that you might have for Neil or indeed for us in the Q&A box below, and I'll do my best to pose them as we go along. Neil, afternoon. How are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me back. I'm really looking forward to this. Got some great stuff to talk about today, but yeah, I'm excited. Thank you for having me back.
No, you're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say myself. I'm conscious that some of our audience may have met you already, but for those who haven't, can you just tell us a little bit about who you are, how you got interested in this topic, and what you're going to be talking to us about today?
Of course I can. So Neil Bage from BIQ. I founded BIQ 5 years ago. It's a behavioural insights company. That kind of sounds like a very grand thing, but let me get to what that is in a second. But let me give you some background really quickly. So I left school and studied to be a PE teacher. And at the time, I studied two things that had a kind of a transformational impact on me. One, I studied human biology, so kind of physiology, how the body works, including the brain. And I also studied sports psychology, so what's going on in the brain and how that impacts, at the time I was studying, sports performance. So I've always had a fascination with how the brain works and how it impacts the world that we live in. And then I fell, as many of us do, into financial services and start working my way through different companies and realizing that actually, you know, the industry as it is, and I'm speaking very kind of large here, doesn't really get under the skin and understand what's going on in the unconscious minds of people who we are asking to make really serious and big financial decisions. So I wanted to kind of move myself into that space. So I set up BIQ. And BIQ, we do research, and we have some pretty funky tools, technology tools that allow us to get into the brain of people and reveal in kind of black and white how we are making decisions in our unconscious mind. So it's a fascinating field, Marcus. It really is, and every day is an education for me. I learn something new every day. I work with some stupidly bright people. Far brighter than I would ever be. But actually, that's what I love about my job. I love learning about humans. I love learning about what's going on in our heads. And then I love taking that learning and applying it into the world so that I can help other people try and make better and safer financial decisions.
Just amazing. I mean, talking about the other things you've got going on, there's so much for us to learn in financial services about how all this works. You're absolutely right. We've some real responsibility we've got to dig into this. So let's get cracking with today. What are you going to be teaching us today?
I'm going to tell some stories today. I'm going to tell some true stories. I'm going to relate to some research, but actually the whole story is about what we should be looking out for in the world in 2020, a world where access to information is now greater than it ever has been before in humankind, and when we make decisions and we are looking for information, things that we should be aware of when we are going through that process to make sure that the decision we end up making is the right decision for us. So it's probably going to take me about half an hour, I reckon. I'm completely happy, you know, for you to stop me and ask me questions. I'm happy if anybody has questions and they put them onto the chat. I don't know how that works, so maybe you should, maybe you could tell them. But I'm very happy to be asked questions as we go through this. I'm happy to be interrupted. But I'm going to go full screen. So I'm going to put this up here, and I'm going to kind of crack straight on. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to tell you a true story. And whilst this story may sound completely bonkers and like I'm making it up, I can guarantee you that this is a true and very well researched story. And you can look this up afterwards. This is a real person. It's a guy called MacArthur Wheeler. And in 1995, MacArthur Wheeler, at the age of 44, walked into 3 banks in Pittsburgh, 3 separate banks, and robbed them at gunpoint. He walked in, he was wearing a blue t-shirt, a blue fleece. He didn't have anything, didn't wear a mask, didn't wear anything. Walked in at gunpoint, CCTV in all the banks captured him, and he robbed 3 banks. That's part 1 of this 2-part story, right? So part 1, MacArthur Wheeler robs a bank, robs 3 banks. Part 2 to this story is actually a chemistry lesson. And I'll tell you how these are linked in a second. And the chemistry lesson is this, and I found this fascinating when I found out, by the way. Yeah, this is a did you know? Did you know that if you took a glass of pure lemon juice and a piece of A4 paper and you got a cotton bud and you dipped the cotton bud in the lemon juice and then you wrote something with that liquid on the paper, it would dry and it will vanish. The A4 paper will look, for all intents and purposes, completely untouched. But if you put heat underneath the paper, what happens is the lemon juice oxidizes and turns black, revealing the message that you wrote. So for years and years and years, this was used to pass secret messages around. Now, I never knew this until I was researching this entire story. And the reason why this is linked is because MacArthur Wheeler knew that this was the case with lemon juice. If you got a cotton bud and wrote on a bit of paper, it became invisible. So he had an idea. He thought, if lemon juice is actually, in essence, a juice that can make things invisible, perhaps if I rubbed it all over my face, then my face would become invisible to CCTV cameras. And I swear I'm not making this up. That was his thought. Now, he wasn't that mad that he decided just to do it and go out there. He decided to try this first to see if it worked. So what he did is he went back home and he took a Polaroid picture of himself before he applied the lemon juice to his face. And the picture came out. This isn't it, but a picture of him came out. So he could hold the Polaroid picture and see himself. He then applied liberally lemon juice all over his face, and he took another Polaroid picture. Now here is where the most beautiful turn of fate happens, because the Polaroid camera he was using didn't work properly, and when the picture came out, the picture was completely blank, and he assumed that this meant he was invisible. He didn't even think about the fact that there was no background in the picture. He couldn't see anything, so he assumed that he was invisible. And he went on to rob 3 banks at gunpoint with his face covered in nothing more than lemon juice. Now, it took police nearly 12 months, even though they had CCTV footage of him. That it took them 12 months to capture him. This is a picture that the police used on national TV to try and just see if anybody could recognize him, and people did recognize him and he was arrested. And what's more amazing is when police knocked on his door and they said to him, we're going to arrest you for these armed robberies, his first words that came out of his mouth were, "But I wore the juice." And he was absolutely convinced that the lemon juice had made him invisible, and therefore he was never going to be caught. And this story from 1995 fell onto the laps of 2 behavioural professors in the US, a guy called David Dunning and a guy called Justin Kruger. And David Dunning and Justin Kruger did a ton of research into why MacArthur Wheeler felt that just with a little bit of knowledge, i.e. lemon juice on paper is invisible, he inflated his ability and his competence and decided that that was good enough to then put on his face to rob a bank. And they founded from this a behavioral bias called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And the Dunning-Kruger effect basically says that the less competent an individual is at a specific task, the more likely they are to inflate their self-appraised competence in relation to that task. It's kind of summed up in that phrase, a little knowledge is a bad thing. It's where we've all done this, we have all been kind of guilty of this to some degree and in some domain of life at some point in our lives. A really simple example is you may be having someone who is investing for the first time ever, and they decide to do it themselves. They don't go to an advisor, they decide, I'm going to do this myself. And they invest a bit of money in the stocks and shares ISA, maybe. And over the course of the next 6 or 7 months, they make money. And there is a very real chance that they would look at that and they would look at their own ability to make money and now think that they are Warren Buffett. They now think that they're the best investor in the world. And their overinflated sense of ego, if you like, then drives their decisions. And the Dunning-Kruger effect is really fascinating as a behavior anyway. But actually the work that David Dunning and Justin Kruger did was a really fascinating revelation, because what they show you is that if you kind of look at this chart on here, let me just bring in the next bits of this. If you look at where it starts on the left-hand side at the bottom, your confidence is low and your competence is a novice. So you don't know anything. But the second you learn a new skill, what happens is your confidence in your ability absolutely skyrockets, but your competence hasn't really shifted at all. And then as you decide to learn more, to invest more of your time in learning about this thing that you are overconfident in, the more your confidence level starts to fall. And it falls and it falls and it falls until the point where you start to genuinely realize that there is a ton of stuff that you don't know. Yes, there is stuff that you know, but there's also a ton of stuff you don't know. And then as you become more and more and more and more competent, your confidence slightly rises. And here's the interesting thing. When you become an expert, typically your confidence in your expertise is never higher than it was at the very beginning when you were a novice and you've just learned this thing for the first time. And it shows the power of how we self-appraise our own abilities when we are trying to do stuff or when we're learning stuff. And what I want to talk about over the next 15 minutes is linked to the Dunning-Kruger effect. I want to talk about overconfidence. And I touched on this last time for those who joined us last time, when I think I asked you a question about the human brain. So I'm going to touch on confidence, and I want to touch on another behavioral bias called probability neglect. Now, the easiest way to understand that is if you flip the words around. It's where we neglect the chance of something happening. In other words, we downplay or overinflate the chance of something happening. Now, the reason why I want to talk about these three things is they all form part of the way in which we process information unconsciously and how they create cognitive errors in the way that we process that information. Now, behavioral biases can be split into two categories: cognitive, which is what I'm talking about today, which is how we process information, and affective. And affective biases are biases that are driven by our emotional state, how we feel. So there's two very different ways that we navigate the world: how we process the information we see and hear, and then how we feel about all of that stuff. I'm only concentrating on the cognitive side today, the cognitive errors, and in particular, overconfidence and probability neglect. Now, why is this important to understand? Well, from an evolutionary perspective, the human brain, as it says on the screen, hasn't really evolved to look around the world and to absorb all of the information and just accept it as it is. What it does is it has to fill in gaps in information, typically gaps in information, in order to make sense of everything that has been presented to us. And we do this in three kind of categories. We do this in how we process information. So, for example, if someone was presenting you with information that you needed to use to make a decision, and your brain unconsciously is telling you that there's information missing, unconsciously your brain will fill in the gaps. And by the time you end up making a decision, it's already been impacted by your behavioral biases. So processing of information is impacted by this evolutionary issue we have about the brain just filling in gaps. That manifests itself in decision making, and it also manifests itself in the way that we recall memories. And I think I may have touched on this last time, but I may not have. But when we recall a memory, we never recall our memories as exact replays of what happened. When something happens in our life, what happens is we take snapshots. It's like having a camera, right? We take little snapshots of everything that's going on, but we don't rapid fire. We just take a picture, and then maybe a few seconds later, another picture, and we submit them to our long-term memory. When we recall those pictures, there are gaps in between them all. And what happens is we create a narrative to fill the gaps that suits the story that we're trying to recall, the memory that we're trying to recall. So we do this all the time, and there's a great field of research going on at the moment called neurolaw, where psychologists and lawyers are working together, in particular around the area of eyewitness accounts, where they are showing through evidence and through MRI scanning and the likes that actually we can't recall memories with any degree of accuracy. Yet and therefore, when you put someone on a witness stand 12, 18 months after the event and ask them to be an eyewitness, all they are doing is recalling the snapshots and filling in the gaps themselves. And of course, with a good lawyer, the lawyer can help fill those gaps and can direct the narrative in the way that they want. So there's a great deal of research in that field. But one of the brain, I said this in my opening gambit, the brain has always fascinated me. And one of the things that I love about the brain is it just does things without us even realizing it. Yes, it fills in gaps, but it can also do some really quite other clever tricks to us. And I'd like to illustrate this to you by just showing you this picture. This is a picture that I took with my wife. We were in a place called Ålesund in Norway. It's one of my favorite places on earth. I was sat in a cafe high on a mountainside eating fish soup this day. I remember it vividly, and that is a memory I can recall relatively accurately. And looking down on this town and just thinking how stunning it is. So I took this picture, and I use this in conferences around the world to show the thing I'm about to show you. So I'd like you all to play along with me. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to turn this picture, I'm going to inverse the color and turn it into a negative, if you like. And then what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to do it yet, I'm going to explain what the rules are, if you like. I'm going to put into the center of this picture in a second a small black circle. And what I'd like you to do when I do that is I would like you to start staring not at the picture, only at the black circle. And I want you to do that for 10 seconds. And I'll count, right? So 10 seconds staring only at the black circle. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this picture off the screen and I'm going to replace it, promise, I'm going to replace it with a black and white picture, no color whatsoever. But I want you to continue staring at where the black circle was, because I'm going to get rid of that as well. So black circle, stare at it for 10 seconds. I'm going to then change the image to black and white, remove the black circle, keep staring at where the black circle was. And what you will find is that your brain immediately, knowing that you've seen this picture in full color, and your brain has already registered what this looks like, your brain, when I show you the black and white picture, will immediately put color in the picture for you, as long as you keep staring at the same point. The second you move your eyes, your brain refocuses and you'll see a black and white picture. But if you keep staring at the space, you'll see it in color, promise you. So 10 seconds, do nothing but stare at the black circle. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Keep staring where that black circle was, and you will see a colored picture. And if you keep staring, you don't move your eyes, the color won't go away. The second you move your eyes, the picture becomes black and white. And it's one of the amazing things about the human brain. It understands what it's looking at, even though I'm not looking at it, and it fills in information that isn't there. It makes us see stuff that you typically, if I said, if anybody came into this call now and I said, what's on there? And it's black and white picture, but I've just seen it in color, people would think you're mad. But actually, that's the power of the human brain. It is absolutely incredible. It sees things that aren't there. And of course, there's lots of these kind of optical illusions around, but one of the most famous optical illusions is called the Ebbinghaus illusion. And it's this that you can see on the screen here. So here's a question. And you answer this question just with your gut feel. Don't kind of overly think this. If you look at those two images on the screen, can you see, and I'm not asking you what you know, I'm asking you what you can see. Can you see that the orange ball on the right is larger than the orange ball on the left? And again, same thing. I'm not asking you what you know. I'm just asking what you can see. Even though you know, perhaps, that the orange balls are exactly the same size, the question is, can you still see one is bigger than the other? And of course you can. I've seen this hundreds and hundreds of times, and I can still see it's bigger than the one on the left. And that's because the way that the brain is processing the context that is being presented to me makes me see things that aren't there. And the only way I can get to the truth, the only way that I can see the real substance that I need to see is by taking away the noise, because those blue circles are creating noise for me. And when I take them out of the image altogether, I get to see that I have two orange circles that are exactly the same size. And to prove I'm not lying, if I bring the blue circles back in and leave the lines on, you can see that they are exactly the same size. And if I took those two thin black lines off, your brain would immediately start to see the one on the right being bigger than the one on the left. There is tons of these optical illusions around that just reveal how the brain, amazing as it is, processes information through our visual cortex at all times, how it sees information and how it fills in gaps and how it kind of processes that information to arrive at a decision. And this is just an illusion, right? Now imagine a marketing company had millions of pounds to spend on producing marketing literature that could, in essence, capitalize on the same processes the brain goes through to make you buy something that you may not want to buy. This is the kind of the purvey of scammers, if you like. These are all the techniques that they ultimately end up using when they try and get people to buy their stuff. So the brain has evolved to fill in gaps. We know that. But also the brain has also evolved to jump to conclusions when information is missing. And it also has a tendency to try and predict. But one of the things that research has proven time and time again is that human beings are absolutely terrible at prediction. We are pretty shocking at it, actually. Now, I want to kind of prove this to you in a second, but I'm just going to ask you a question. And I want you to be absolutely honest here. Again, don't overthink this, because what I'm trying to get you to do is I'm just trying to get you to think quickly. I'm not trying to get you to slow down and really ponder. I'm trying to draw out your instinct, if you like. So let's assume that I have a coin in my hand and I flicked that coin and I flicked it 7 times so far. And 7 times so far, every time it's landed on a head. So I've had 7 heads in a row. The question is, if I flick the coin now for an 8th time, what's it likely to be? Now, we can intellectualize this and you can arrive at the absolute correct answer, which is it could be a head or a tail, because every single toss of a coin is an independent toss of the coin. What happened previously has no bearing on what is about to happen at all. And yet, when this has been presented to tens of thousands of people through research over the years, there is still, even though intellectually we know that the toss of a coin is 50-50 every time, there is still a part of us which thinks 7 heads, it's got to be a tail. Surely a tail is due to come in at some point. And of course, That is true. That is a true statement. But that shouldn't be what drives your answer to the question, do you think it's going to be a head or a tail? The answer to that question is it's 50-50. It always is 50-50. But what we tend to do is we have a tendency to use previous information to predict what will happen in the future. And in many cases, that's a really bad place to put ourselves, because in some instances, what happened in the past has absolutely zero bearing on what will happen in the future. And this is a really simple example of kind of illustrating that 7 heads in a row, even if that was 10, 15, 20 or 30 heads in a row, does not mean that the next toss of a coin will be a tail or it'll be a head. And there's a great piece of another great story. If you want to check this out in your own time, it's an amazing story to read about. In 1917, in a casino in Monaco, and again, this is something I presented at a conference last year, there was a roulette wheel, and it was a Friday night in Monaco, packed casino, and 35 spins of a roulette wheel had resulted in 35 blacks coming out. And people start getting attention because their view was it has to be red. There has to be a red coming out. And people start flocking to the table, and more money was put on red only to come out. 35 black numbers coming out in a row. More and more money piled onto the table. There was 47 blacks in a row before the first red came out. And yet, from the 35th number, people start piling money on. And by the time that penultimate black was out, there was millions of francs of money sitting on the table, people hoping that red would come out because their brains were saying, red has to come out. Well, the question is, why does it? Every time you spin that roulette wheel and throw the ball in, that ball can land anywhere. And what it shows you, and the reason why this story is so well known, is it kind of talks to it talks to prediction, but it also talks to our weakness as a cognitive species of trying to find patterns in stuff when a pattern doesn't exist. We see patterns and we think there's a pattern. All that means something, and it means nothing at all. So we need to be quite careful about how we process information like that. So I'd like you to play one final game with me. These are not in order. These are randomly ordered at the moment. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to think about which of these events you believe to be the most likely to happen to you and which is the least most likely to happen to you. And the royal flush one at the top is if you sat down now to play a game of poker with a friend, what is the likelihood that the first 5 cards you are given is a royal flush, which for those who don't play poker is the best hand you could ever get in poker. So what's the chance of you getting delivered in your first 5 cards a royal flush? What's the chance of you winning the national lottery? What's the chance of you going out in a storm and being struck by lightning? What's the chance of a piece of a meteor falling from the sky and landing on you, causing you significant damage? And what's the chance of you living to 100? So all I want you to do is just for the next 1 minute while I have a sip of my water is think about which one you believe is the most likely to happen and which one you think is the least likely to happen, and see if you can just quickly rank them in order for me. Okay. This is really interesting. So this falls back to my point I'm making here when I said we're not very good at predicting. We're not very good at understanding the chance of something happening. And this is what probability neglect is all about. You know, the probability neglect means that people are quite happy to get in a car and drive up the M1 at 70, 80 miles an hour because they feel safe. But when they get in a plane to fly to Alicante on holiday, they feel like they're going to die in a plane crash. You know, that's probability neglect. They are neglecting the chance of something happening. And this kind of plays out in here. So I wonder who put winning the lottery high and who put a royal flush low. It'd be quite interesting at some point to find out what your thoughts were on this. But let me put them in the correct order for you. Of the most likely to happen to someone living in the UK today, down to the least likely to happen to someone living in the UK today. And it looks like this. So the most likely thing to happen with modern medical advances is that everybody on this call statistically should live to 100. Then the next is a royal flush, meteor strike, struck by lightning, and winning the lottery. The odds are on the screen. So your chance of living in the year 2020, the chance of you living to 100 is now 1 in 3. The chance of you being delivered the perfect hand in poker, the first hand you ever get, is 1 in 650,000, which is a little bit less than a meteor strike. You have 1 in 3 million chance of being struck by lightning, and you have 1 in 45 million chance of winning the national lottery. And yet, what happens when you present these 5 things to people is, and especially if they play the national lottery every week, is they overinflate or underplay, in some instances, the chance of something happening and believe that the chance of them winning the national lottery is a lot higher than some other random event that they've never experienced in their life, such as a meteor strike or being struck by lightning. It's really interesting exercise to go through. And again, I've done this many, many times with people, and I often choose different things, but I get them. And I've done this once where I've had a room of people do this pre-event so that I can get to see how people are thinking. And it's a real revelation of how people, how people process information and how they marry the chance of something happening to them compared to the actual, the simple, plain facts, the evidence, if you like. So what this all means in relation to how you make decisions is this. There are some tips that I often give out in relation to not those affective emotional biases, but our cognitive biases, when we need information to be able to arrive at a decision. And the first tip that I would give, I give everybody is to pause. And I say pause, pause, pause to make a point. Before you make any decision of any significance, you should pause. And you should say, in here, I'm about to make a decision that has a significant, can have a significant impact on me, on my health, my financial well-being, my overall well-being, whatever it is. I just need to make sure that I am going to make the right decision for me. In other words, don't make a big significant decision based on your gut or a knee-jerk reaction. Make sure you pause. Secondly, make sure that any decision you make is only ever based on fact and on evidence, nothing else. Because in reality, nothing else really matters. If you're making a decision where you need to process information to arrive at a choice, then that choice has to be rooted in fact and evidence. We can, and we do all the time, make decisions based on opinion and our views, if you like. But often our opinions and our views are just manifestations of how we're processing the world and may not actually reflect the truth that is out there. So pause, 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 and then base decisions in fact and in evidence and nothing else. There's 2 more I'm going to come on to in a second. The reason why I talk about fact and evidence is because of something I said right at the beginning. When Marcus asked me to introduce myself, I said, we live in an era where access to information is more readily available than ever before in the history of humankind. We can go onto a search engine, Google, whatever, and we can find information in a phenomenal, at a phenomenal speed. So for example, if you typed in, and I've done this recently for an article I wrote, if you type in, where should I invest my money on Google and hit enter, at the very top left of your Google screen, it will say something like returned 7.3 million results in 0.4 seconds. Now, just think about that statement. You know, to be able to return that quantity of data at that speed is absolutely phenomenal. It's a massive blessing, but equally it's a curse, because now we have so much information at our fingertips. How on earth do we separate the truth from the fake news, if you like. And I just want to share this last story with you. This is the most amazing piece of research from MIT University in the US. And what they did, they went in and worked with Twitter. So, the social media platform Twitter, and Twitter gave them access anonymized to millions upon millions upon millions of tweets. And MIT University started to analyze all the tweets. And this particular story was born out of that research. So on the 12th of April 2018 in America, there was a tweet posted online, and it was posted at 6:36 p.m. And the tweet was about a potential localized terror attack. Basically, someone was seen driving a car at people, and someone posted a tweet at 6:36 p.m. on the 12th of April. And not only was that tweet inaccurate, it was also racist in the way that it was written. In other words, it was completely fake. There was no truth in that tweet at all. Now, the reason why I pause here is 43 minutes later at 7:19 p.m, this was the time when a second tweet was posted, which was the truth, which said it wasn't a terrorist attack. It was an elderly gentleman driving a car who had mounted a curb, had accidentally hit a woman, but had also then crashed into a lamppost. It was a complete accident. And that tweet said the truth. The one in red was a complete lie. And yet, what happened over the next 24 hours is absolutely staggering, because the fake tweet over the course of the next 24 hours absolutely skyrocketed and was read and commented on or retweeted by 1.12 million people. The truth, the tweet that contained the truth, was only read, commented on, or retweeted by 82,000 people. And what their research was trying to prove, which everybody kind of knew anecdotally, but they wanted to put some substance behind this, was that fake news travels much quicker than the truth. And what they found out was that fake news travels 12 times faster and deeper than the truth does. So the second somebody posts something online that's a load of rubbish, the likelihood of that absolutely flying through the social media networks is 12 times more likely than me posting the absolute truth. And this creates a real interest for us, because when we're searching for information to make decisions, we need to be able to filter out all of this noise. We need to be able to get rid of that, find out where that red line is and go, I don't want to look at that because it's not true, and find the information where the truth lives. Because this is where we should be looking for our information, because else we're making decisions on lies, on opinions, and on views. And fake news as a subject, by the way, people tend to think that this is a relatively new phenomenon. There's one particular world leader who spouts this phrase every single day of his life, but it's not new at all. And if you go back in the history, King Charles II put out a proclamation in 1672, as you can see on the screen, to restrain the spreading of false news. That's an attempt to nourish a universal jealousy and dissatisfaction in the minds of His Majesty's good subjects. And this was born out of the boom in coffee shops around the time, where people who were quite happy to be dissenting, political viewed people would go and create pamphlets of fake news, and they would try and post them or give them out to people to speak ill of the king at this time. And again, same thing, it was fake news. And this was recognized as early as 1672. So we've always had people spreading falsehoods for a long time. The difference is that today we can access them in 30 seconds through a computer. In those days, it meant that people who wanted to spread the fake news through their pamphleting would have to travel far and wide and physically hand them out. That's not where we are in the year 2020. So actually understanding what's true and what's not becomes just as important. So pause. Make sure that you're basing all of your decisions in fact and in evidence and nothing else. Also, make sure that the information that you have is absolutely relevant to the decision you're about to make, because there is a lot of information that I can access. And that plays to my last point, where we need to really make a concerted effort to try and ignore all of the noise. There is a lot of noise out there. You only need to go onto any of the social networks, and sadly, we're starting to see a lot of noise in the mainstream media too. The mainstream news channels are also starting to promote noisy opinions and views, which I think does all of us a disservice. So try and when you need to make decisions, make sure that you follow those 4 principles. And what it does is it gives you the best chance possible at actually making a decision that is right for you. And I'll finish off by saying this, that and I'm speaking personally here, so I'm not speaking for anybody else. My belief of a really good financial planner is twofold. One, they are there to help you and guide you in creation and the management of and the delivery of your financial plan. But I think in relation to financial decision making, they should also be a kind of like a co-pilot and help you navigate this noisy world that we live in. And if you have any questions around this doesn't make sense, or is this noise, or is this true, your financial planners are there to have those conversations with, to make sure that any financial decision you make it puts you in the best place to live the life that you want to live in a world of financial well-being, and like I said earlier on, overall well-being. So I'm going to wrap it up there, and Marcus, any questions that you have, please feel free. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen full screen so that I can see you as well.
Fantastic, Neil. Thank you. That was so interesting. I've made a whole host of notes here. The word that keeps coming up for me over and over again as you were talking is context. You talked last time a little bit about the phenomenon of anchoring, and then context then came back up when you were talking about the balls. I was thinking we're affected by the context that the orange ball is in. Where do you see the role of context in all of this? What does that word mean to you and its importance when we come to making decisions?
I read a book recently. I finished a book recently, which actually I think is behind me. A book called Behave, and it's written by one of the world's leading neuroscientists. And I will tell you this now, it's one of the hardest books I've ever read. It took me 7 months to read the book. One, because it's thick, but 2, because it's quite deep. And this guy, the author constantly keeps saying, context, context, context. Every chapter, context, context, context. And he kind of echoes my view, or I echo his view, in that the way that we present information to people, if you present it in a contextless environment, it's a meaningless piece of data. Or everything that we try and look for in the world, everything we see, everything we hear, everything we say could be classified as a piece of data. And if you look at those pieces of data in isolation, then they mean nothing. So I could say to you the word fish, and I've said the word fish, but you'd probably say, why did you say fish? And the reason why you're saying that is because you need context. You need to understand why I said what I said. Else I'm just a random nutcase saying random words. So in the world of financial services, if people are looking for information and there's no context in that, there's no meaning to it, and it's just a lot of words cobbled together, then it kind of acts as it's like a disability in the decision-making process. It doesn't really help at all. It actually hinders people, because not only are they now trying to make sense of what it means in a context that's relevant to them, they're reading something that's badly structured and badly put together. So for me, every time I try and make a decision, I need to frame it in a context that is relevant to me. Mm-hmm. So why is Neil Bage making this decision? Well, I'm making this decision because of this, this, this. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that, that, and that. Okay, so why is that important? And I start having these internal dialogues with myself until I get to a point where the context of what I'm trying to do is absolutely crystal clear. And I think the financial services sector or industry, whichever word we want to use, has a responsibility in the information it presents all of its clients to make sure that the context is absolutely understood or is clear enough for people to be able to join the dots themselves.
Yeah, that's really interesting. My mind goes, just with that last little bit you were saying there, to thinking about what motivates people. And we are, part of the philosophy we have as a firm is that, we're absolutely planning led. We try, and I suppose in the language of today, we try and root everything that we do in the context of the life of the person and or the people or the family that we are interacting with. But I think a lot of the issues that come with financial services is the context is just completely wrong. People are obsessed with beating benchmarks or beating their neighbour's performance, and actually I think you've really helped me to see today that's perhaps part of the service that I hadn't really realised that we offered, is we help to kind of refocus the context on that which matters. Do you think that's?
I think that is an absolutely a brilliant summary of that entire of this conversation, Mark. So I'd add one more thing if I can. There is there's a theory, if I call it a theory, called the Hedonic Treadmill. Mm-hmm. And the Hedonic Treadmill is where we basically try and it's where we are constantly trying to make ourselves happy, typically by buying stuff. That's or getting a bigger and better car, striving for a bigger and better house, because we think these things will make us happy. And alongside the Hedonic Treadmill is a thing called set point theory, which basically says that every human being has a set point of happiness. And it doesn't matter what you constantly add to that, you will always return to your set point of happiness. And one of the things I've been working on personally, and I don't mind sharing this with anybody, over the last 5 or 6 years, is trying to establish and figure out what my set point of happiness is. And I'm trying to figure out what makes me happy, genuinely happy, and what makes me just temporarily happy because society deems it to be a happy thing that I'm doing, So I've learned about myself that I don't need a big house. I don't need a flash car. What I do need is I need to live near, as I do, I need to live near a beach so that I can go and have my little beach barbecues, because that is my happy place. That's where, for me, the world just washes away and I can just be with me and my wife and my little dog, and I'm just the happiest I can be. And for that, I don't need a ton of money. So all of my life, I've been working, my professional life so far, I've been working like an idiot to try and make more and more and more money because I believed that I needed more and more stuff. And the reality is, as I hit my mid-40s, I realized that I've just wasted 10 years of my professional life doing something that I didn't need to do. So it's when you have these conversations that you can create the context that you need to make the decisions that you need to make. But, I'm just adding to what you said, Marcus, because you said it very articulately. So
it feels to me then that, the other word that I've written down here in big letters just from the end of your presentation is noise. And I suppose there's some real challenge in establishing what is useful context and what is unhelpful noise, and learning to separate those two and remove one from your life and really focus on the other.
Yes.
Quite how you go about doing that, I don't know. I think I suppose if you can answer that, you've really nailed life.
Yeah, that's true. But there are things that you can do to help yourself. For example, only go to trusted sources for information.
Yeah.
So social media, and I'm not being horrible to anybody, because I'm a human too, right? But social media is not the place where you should be getting your facts and evidence from, typically, because it's full of people's opinions. And they force their views on people very strongly. So you should be trying to find the sources of sources of evidence and fact from reputable sources. And it's why I raised my point about financial planners being almost like a co-pilot, because actually what a typical person does is they look at all of the information and they see the noise, and then if they have that conversation with a financial planner, the financial planner can then give them not only the context, but they can get rid of some of the superfluous noise that sits within that information and say, no, you don't need to concentrate. Yes, I know that the benchmark is amazing and your portfolio is under the benchmark, but you can't spend a benchmark. You can't realize a benchmark. It's a benchmark, and it's somebody somewhere has decided that that's the best benchmark for them. Why does that matter to you? Actually, your performance of your asset, your portfolio, and how you're doing in your financial plan is more relevant, because that is about you, and it's about you and your family and the life that you want to live. Forget about anybody else, because that creates noise in itself. You know, I grew up in a relatively poor part of the northeast of England, and I was brought up to think hard work is the thing you should do. But if you work hard, Neil, you'll get lots of money. And when you get lots of money, Neil, you'll be happy. Absolutely. And it's taken me all this time in my life to figure out that sadly is not true at all. But it's only now that I can create the context for myself, and I can ignore the noise that's around me, and I can start to figure out what's important to me and my family.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. Can I turn to the subject of memory? You raised some really interesting and I think in many ways really scary points about the way that we understand memory, and it's something that I've done a little bit of reading on. Malcolm Gladwell has done a lot of writing about the way that memory works and perhaps its untrustworthiness. Do you want to just tell us a little bit more about how that works, and perhaps whether there's anything that we can do to? I was so interested. You were just talking about how untrustworthy memory was, and then you said, but I can recall that bit accurately. I thought, there he is, even he's fallen for it.
I do, and that's why I said it with a smile, Marcus, because I realized how, you know, and I say this to people all the time. I travel the world talking about human behavior, but say I'm just as behaviorally biased as anybody else, because I'm a human being, and I just, what I do is as I'm saying it, my brain recognizes I'm saying it. That's what's funny about it. So I'm as paradoxical as the next person, but and you're absolutely right. I can only remember that place because I've taken a picture of it, and the picture evokes memories that typically, if I was trying to do that from scratch, you know, if somebody said to me, "Can you describe Alollesund to me as a place?" I would have said, "Yeah, it's like a central town with fjords either side." Or what else? I can't remember. But when I look at the picture, I remember walking over one of the little bridges. I remember sitting by the quayside, because that picture triggers memories in my head. But back to your question, what typically happens when we are experiencing the world? So is that we take the most salient, the most prominent pieces of information, because of course they stand out. So if you think, I'm trying to think of a really simple example. Say you're walking down the street and ahead of you, two cars crash. Right now, one salient piece of information that will get locked immediately into your long-term memory is the fact that you witnessed a crash. But that's broad, right? That's quite broad. In the moment, you will know that one of the cars is red and one of the cars is blue, because you can see it. But you'll also see the people in the car who potentially could be injured. And one might be a man, one might be a woman. In the moment, you will see that the man is wearing an orange t-shirt, and you'll see the woman is wearing a purple dress, whatever. So all of these bits of information, the tiny piece of information, in the moment you see, and your brain is processing them, and it's seeing it, and it's going through the process of saying, right, I need to start storing this information. What do I need to store in order to create the memory, and what is completely not needed for me to remember what happened? So your brain will, and I'm not saying this is what happens in this example, I'm illustrating the point. Your brain might say, car crash, long-term memory. Two cars, long-term memory. Do I need to know the color of the cars? Not really. Okay, get rid of that. Man and woman, might be important, might not be. Let's put that there as well. The fact he's wearing an orange t-shirt, not needed. Purple dress, not needed. So we get rid of the little bits of information that make up the full picture, if you like. And that's because our brain hasn't got the capacity to hold all of that information for every memory. It's not possible. So our brain then commits to our long-term memory, car crash, two cars, man and woman. That's it. 2 years later, somebody says to you, have you ever seen a car crash? You go, oh yeah, there was one just down the road from where I lived once, two cars head on. Oh my God, what happened? I don't know. I just saw two, who was driving the car? And you'll probably say, I think it was a man, and it was a man and a woman. I can't remember which was driving which car, because that gets a bit muddied up. And what happens is then, that's how you would recall it to a friend. But if you were then in a court and you were being drilled by someone who was saying, what did you see? What did you see? The woman was speeding, wasn't she? You know, and actually one of the amazing things about memory, I'm diverging, I'm taking a sidetrack here. There's an amazing technique used in neuro law that they've studied where lawyers ask a question and it can intercept the memory as it's coming out and change the memory. So, for example, if a lawyer said, did you see the two cars smashing together? That can have a different impact on the memory recall than if they said, did you see the two cars when they collided?
Yeah.
Because using words like smash instantly make it sound like it's a big thing, and therefore your memory gets exaggerated as it comes out. And we start to fill in all. What were you doing? I was walking down the street. Who were you with? I was with my wife and my dog. Oh, right. What? And you start making things up. And if you could take a CCTV snapshot of exactly what happened and how your memory is recalling, those two things will never, ever, ever be identical. So memories are great at recalling really salient, emotionally driven events like the birth of children, your marriage. You know, look at I'm a happily married, right? I got married in 1997, and I remember my wedding day. Can I remember any of the details? Absolutely not. Of course, I can't remember the details. I can remember I was wearing a black suit, but I can't remember really. I have to watch my wedding video back to realize who was there, and I still say I didn't realize they were at the wedding. You know, and that's because my brain can't process all that information and store all of that in long-term memory. It has to get rid of stuff. So it's a fascinating memory recall is a fascinating area. And if anybody listening wants to find out more, Malcolm Gladwell's written some great books about memory. You're absolutely right, Marcus.
Yeah, and just on that, because I think it's always really helpful if we could perhaps be specific about some of the recommendations. I mean, I'm all right thinking Talking to Strangers, there's a huge amount about memory in that book. And that's just a spectacularly good read and a fantastic audiobook as well, actually, if anyone's on Audible or the other audiobook providers. It's just an amazing book that really dives into this. And am I right in thinking, Neil, that actually if you revisit memories year after year after year, researchers have kind of tracked memories changing. You know, the event happens and then the memory changes in the head of the person as the years roll by.
That's right. That's right. And I'll tell you that's absolutely bang on. And I'll tell you one of the other scary things about memory. And this for me, I don't know where I sit with this research, by the way, because I find part of it going against my ethics, but the science part of my brain thinks it's amazing. Scientists took a handful of teenagers and with their parents in on this, they managed to plant a false memory in the heads of half of them. They made them believe that they did something as children that they absolutely didn't do. And then years later, when they were recalling the memory, that was a false memory, they were recalling it with the most amazing clarity. And it's a really scary piece of research that how a psychologist can actually with properly framed situations like that. Of course, they need the parents, excuse me, to be in on it. How they can tell a story that just repeat, and it becomes real. It becomes your reality all of a sudden. So like I said, memory recall is just a really fascinating field. But by the way, I'll just say that Malcolm Gladwell generally as a writer is interesting. Most of his books are interesting. He's a very easy person to read.
Yeah, I quite agree. Okay, perhaps I can just turn to one of the questions that we've had come in. I don't know if on your presentation you could perhaps take us back to the slide that was talking about probabilities. We've just had a question, I think, which is probably just about clarifying some of the stats on there. When you're talking about meteorite strike,
yeah.
My suspicion is what you're saying is what's the odds of you being hit by a meteorite over the course of your lifetime?
Correct.
Because Phil said surely we should be hearing about meteorite strikes on the news all the time if they're happening that frequently. But my guess is it's over your 75-year lifetime or whatever that might be.
Exactly, and it doesn't mean, by the way, I'm going to clarify. I was hoping somebody wouldn't pick me up on this, but fair play to Phil for picking me up. when you say meteorite strike, what it actually means is the statistic is it's actually encompassing. So it means either a piece of something falling from space, falling from the sky, which could be a part of a meteorite hitting you, might not cause damage. I'm pretty sure it hurt. Or lumped into this group is also bits of debris falling from aircraft.
Right. Okay.
As well, lumped into this piece of research. But I kind of use this just to make a light-hearted or create a light-hearted look at the fact that we don't really understand the lottery, for example. The chance of winning the lottery is ridiculous, 1 in 45 million.
I mean, this is one of the moments where the word context came into my head once again, because, you know, the lottery is something that we bump into every day of our lives when the numbers are read out on the news, or, you know, apologies, I don't play the lottery, maybe it's weekly. But, you know, we don't hear, as Phil says, about meteorite strikes every day. So, you know, we don't, as a result, we misallocate those chances, don't we?
But that's exactly the same as we don't hear about the fact that and I'm making this figure up, by the way, we don't hear the fact that there's 86,000 car crashes every day that kill 10,000 people, but we hear one when one plane crashes. So it's the same thing. It's why we don't hear that hundreds of thousands of people are dying around the world of heart disease, but we do hear when one person gets murdered. You know, it's a completely different. It's the way that the news presents information too. It's the way that the news chooses to not present, and what it chooses to present. And it's why there are people around the world who believe that the chance of them being involved in a terrorist attack is actually greater than the reality of them being involved in a terrorist attack. It's because it's a salient message, and we hear about it on the news a lot, and we don't hear about people dying in vast numbers of illnesses that are curable and preventable. It's because it's not newsworthy. Same thing.
I heard something recently about people being asked to compare the cost of insurance that covered death in the event of a terrorist attack and the cost of insurance that covered death for any cause, and I suppose because of how we hear about it, people thought that they would be willing to pay more for life insurance that only paid out in the event of a terrorist attack than insurance that would pay out in the event of any type of death, which I think is absolutely amazing.
It's completely counterintuitive.
Yeah,
you know, it really is, because what we do is we typically underinsure the things that are likely to happen and overinsure for the things that are unlikely to happen. It's the paradoxical human.
I understand. We've just had a request if you could just show your last slide again. I don't know if you can pull that one up for us. I think this was the one that related to cutting through the noise and making decisions. Okay, so the first question I wrote down as you were talking was, you alluded to the fact that the world is more complicated today than ever before, which I feel it's fair to then say means that as humans we are having to deal with and process more inputs today than we've ever had to deal with. And my question initially was, well, how can we cut through this? I think you've begun to elucidate that. I mean, so if we were to try and really distill down your advice on that front as we begin to wrap up here, it's what? Be aware that context is everything.
Yep.
Really think about where you get the information that you choose to trust from.
Yes. And a third point I would add to that is when you are searching in particular online, of course, we pretty much don't go to libraries anymore. We pretty much use our laptop as our library. So when you're searching online and you are looking for an answer to something, make sure that the question that you ask of Google isn't biased in itself. So an example I often give, and I may have done this last time, is, if you think blue-eyed people are the most intelligent and you search for, are blue-eyed people the most intelligent, you're pretty much going to get yes as a response. But if you take the word blue out and you just type in eye color and intelligence, then you will get a much more rounded and much more fact-based response to your Google search. So we can help ourselves by being conscious about how we are searching for information in the first place, and try and making sure that confirmation bias, our own opinions and views, aren't factored into the wording of the question that we then ask Google, because Google will just give you a response that you want to hear. And there's a difference between what you want to hear and maybe what you need to hear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I love speaking to you, Neil, because I feel like one of the key services that you provide is you educate us that these things exist, and then just by doing that, we're then able to recognise all the potential biases that we come up with, that we exhibit every day. And I suppose on that note, we obviously provide advice for a living. That's what we do. What are the things that we as financial services professionals can be doing to try and mitigate the effects of these biases when we do what we do every day?
I think it's a case. It's a similar process to what's on the screen, I guess, Marcus. It's about kind of, every time you have a conversation with a client, every time you produce literature for a client, and I get that a lot of that is actually regulatory, and I do understand that. To make sure that it's not framed in a particular way, or it doesn't anchor clients to a particular figure, or it doesn't include data that maybe plays to probability neglect. I've worked in this industry for a long time now, and I've seen some pretty abhorrent stuff that's produced for clients to consume, for your client, not your client, for clients to consume, and it's absolutely framed in a particular way, or it includes jargon and words that just become a bit overwhelming for people, and they don't want to say I don't understand, so they kind of just go, yeah, look, if it's come from you, it must be okay. And they're agreeing to something that they don't fully understand. And I think that's wrong. I think what we should be doing as an industry, and me as a behavioural guy working with people like you, all of you at Expert Wealth, who are amazing at this stuff, is to say, let's make sure that everything that we do with our clients gives them the best chance at arriving at the best decision. That's all we can do. But if we just do that, it typically ends up being enough. But if we ignore all of this stuff, and we just keep doing what we've always done, and again, I'm speaking about the industry generally, and just pushing out one size fits all documentation and messages, then we will come unstuck pretty quickly, because one size doesn't fit all. The reason why I love doing what I'm doing is because every human being I meet is unique in their own right. And I love that about people. I love the fact that Neil is Neil and Marcus is Marcus. I love that. We might have things in common, of course, but the way we are navigating the same world is different. The way that we process information is different. So if I don't factor that in, and I just assume, well, because I know you and I think we're similar, therefore you'll agree with whatever I say, I think that I think it's wrong. So, as a financial advice, financial planning business, anything you can do that makes sure that your clients can end up making better decisions for their overall financial well-being it's an amazing thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you've just brought back into my mind your talk about the SPOT theory of happiness. Would you be prepared to tell us a little bit about how you went about trying to understand where you are and how that is for you?
I don't mind sharing that at all. I set up BIQ, and I set it up to do one thing, and it's always been kind of at the front of my mind. And this goes back to a very personal story where my dad, when I was a kid, was missold to, and it ended up ruining his life. And it had a very significant impact. I've got four siblings, so there's 5 kids, and it ended up having a real impact on his life and therefore our lives. And I realized later on in life that perhaps he wasn't completely missold to. Perhaps he also misbought. His overinflated ego, and he's not an egotistical man by any stretch, he's a very humble and meek man, but he is an incredible brainy engineer. And I wonder whether he applied that logic of I'm a bright engineer to financial matters, and they're not the same thing. And again, anyway, the long and short of it is it didn't work out at all, and it ended up having an impact on his life. So I kind of went into BIQ thinking, if I can make a difference to someone like my dad, then I'll die a happy man. I don't need to be a millionaire. I don't want to, as long as I can live the life I want to live, I don't need to be a multi-millionaire from selling a a funky technology business. I really don't. But what makes me happy is when I hear genuinely, almost it moves me, is when people say, I love that talk you gave and it made me think of this, and as a result I didn't do that. And you kind of go, wow, that's quite a big thing for me to have achieved in life. It's not the money thing. And when I had this conversation with myself, everything changed, because I thought, what's BIQ all about? If it's not about money, it's not. It's about changing people's lives. Then actually, why am I trying to, bring in tons of money and investment and pay myself a big salary when actually I don't need any of this? It's not making me happier. It's not making me happier at all. And then I start doing things like sitting down at the beach and having a barbecue with my wife and my dog, and realizing just how peaceful I feel, and how the world just seems to the noisy world just seems to vanish, and it's just us, and everything I love and everything I hold dear is within a little tight circle, and money doesn't factor into that at all. So I kind of go, do you know what? I could quite happily live in a smaller house near a beach. I need a car to get me from A to B, of course I do, but I'm happy walking. And it's when you have these really quite the quite poignant discussions with yourself, that you start to realize what you want in life. And I'm really glad that I've realized that at the age I am. I'm 46. I'm glad I've realized it at the age I'm at, because else I could have just been on that treadmill of life, striving for more and more money, buying more and more stuff, and getting to the age of 60 and 70 and realizing I'm still not happy. And by that point, it's too late to do anything about it, And I feel sorry for the kids who are coming into the world today, who live in a world of Instagram and social media telling them how they should be and how they should live their lives, because it's going to they're bombarded with perfection, and sadly there's no such thing, And I try and tell my godchildren this, and just say to them, just do what makes you happy. Don't do what social media tells you will make you happy. Figure it out for yourself. So this hedonic treadmill set point theory piece was a big revelation for me in my life, and it changed I would go as far as saying it's changed the course of my life, and for the better, I feel.
Wow, thank you for sharing that with us. That's wonderful. I mean, I think what you've just described is perhaps cutting through the most important noise of all, isn't it? And I think that's a lovely positive note to end on. It also tees us up quite nicely for the next virtual afternoon tea we're having, which is going to be on the 23rd of June at 3 o'clock, when we've got Louis from the Kinder Institute who'll be joining us. Louis is a wonderful, wise, kind and caring, phenomenal human being, and he's going to be kind of picking up in many ways where Neil's just left off for us there. So it just falls to me, really, Neil, just to say thank you so much for joining us today.
You're very, very welcome. It's a pleasure. I love doing this stuff with you guys, so it's a pleasure.
Well, we love having you on. Thank you, and perhaps we'll do it again. That would be fab. So thank you all for listening once again. Thanks for joining us today, and please don't hesitate to get in touch if there's anything we can do for you. We're always here. Okay, thanks a lot. Have a good rest of your day. Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.